As everyone in this chamber will be aware, the Environment and Planning Committee has been undertaking an extensive inquiry into the decline of Victoria's ecosystems. A range of experts from many different backgrounds have all echoed the sentiment that the current legislation neglects the environment in favour of development approvals based on other factors. I'd like to take a moment to relay the words of some of these expert witnesses. Firstly, Ms Sharon Terry, the Environment Manager at Greater Shepparton Council, said, "I think there's an overarching intent to consider biodiversity, but in reality, the policy is very much geared towards development, both urban development and agricultural development. I think there is some work that we can do around the policies and how to reach a more balanced motivation for applying the planning scheme." Dr Bruce Lindsay, Senior Lawyer at Environmental Justice Australia, said, "The basic problem is that sustainability is treated at best parsimoniously in decision-making and policy-making. More commonly, it is given lip service." And he goes on to say, "Unfortunately, a major failing at the legal level in the design of the law is that those laws are not really designed to give proper effect to, say, ecological sustainability." Professor Lee Godden, Director of the Centre for Resources, Energy and Environment Law at the University of Melbourne, said, "I think that some of the principles that govern our legislation, such as ecologically sustainable development, are no longer fit for purpose. I do not think our legislation at the moment is particularly geared towards restoration. There's a window of opportunity for us to think about investments in a very different way, and one of those investments is in ecological restoration." Dr Nadine Richings from Enriched Pursuits said, "One of the things that just again is mind-blowing to me is that if we can appreciate how important the environment is and we can write environmental laws that truly protect our environment, they should be sacrosanct. At the moment, what we find is that almost like they are a tick box exercise, and if something more important comes up, like planning or like development, it is like the environment laws are just torn up and cast aside." Nina Earle, member of the Kingston Advisory Committee, said, "What I would say is that the population requirements or the requirements of people should not necessarily take precedence over the natural environment. And where the population density spreads, it is really important to keep biodiverse pockets, especially across suburban or urban areas. There's a tendency to think the natural environment we can just dispense with in a built-up area, and the wildlife will go somewhere else. Well, they're running out of places to go, frankly. It is really, really important to provide those wildlife corridors across the suburbs where the green areas still exist, and along riparian waterways and the coastline. Especially connectivity between the coast and the hinterland is also really important. We need to maintain these corridors." Dr Megan O'Shea, ecologist from Victoria University, said, "The two main causes, from my perspective, associated with the decline of this ecosystem are, by far and away, habitat destruction and habitat clearance, and the other is associated with a lack of management, poor management or inappropriate management regimes. Obviously, in Melbourne, urban development is really the big driver of that." And finally, Mr Gerard Drew, South Gippsland Conservation Society, said, "Long-term environmental protection may be in conflict with other prerogatives of the government, generalised economic development, and the evidence is that the environment comes last. That's why the protection of the environment needs to play a pivotal role in the planning legislation itself. And to reinforce this, the bill strengthens the requirements on decision makers to focus on the environment. The bill would introduce the requirement on a developer or applicant for a planning permit to complete an environmental impact statement to be lodged with the responsible authority, be it a council or in some cases even government departments. The proposed environmental impact statement would encompass information on the project, including its environmental impacts and mitigation measures, and would be used to inform decisions made by the planning authority and responsible authority. The environmental impact statement would require a description of the proposed development, a description of the existing environment that may be affected, predictions of significant environmental effects of the proposal, if any, and relevant alternatives based on scientific advice. Proposed measures to avoid, minimise or manage adverse environmental effects, and a proposed program for monitoring and managing environmental effects during project implementation. Outline of the impact on natural flora, fauna, as well as potential degradation to soil, water or air. Threatened species must be identified, including native grasslands, and measures proposed for their protection on site. If the opinion is that there are to be no environmental impacts, then this must be stated. The requirements for the EIS to be taken into account will apply to all planning authorities under this Act, be it councils, BCAT or the Minister. And I want to stress the point that this requirement will in most cases not jeopardise or unnecessarily encumber small-scale projects with red tape. If Greg from down the street wants to renovate his garden shed, he can do so. There's no planning permit required. For a small development such as a dual occupancy on an existing footprint, which requires a planning permit, all the applicant needs to do is include an impact statement that there'll be no environmental impacts as a result of this project, and the buck stops there. If there is vegetation involved, it must be assessed and if considered to be native, natural or habitat supporting for native animals, it must be protected, damage minimised or otherwise dealt with on site. The Council will be able to determine whether or not these small-scale projects realistically will or won't be having an adverse effect on the environment. However, all Council decisions will be open to be challenged in the normal way. Minor or incremental effects must also be taken into account, since addressing each application as a standalone has often led to widespread environmental damage. This might be the case when assessing an application in an identified wildlife corridor. Once again, I refer to evidence given at the inquiry by Mr Gerard Drew, Executive Committee Member, South Gippsland Conservation Society. In regards to overall effects of multiple individual sand mining applications in a native bushland environment, he says, also the threat of, in this example, sand mining are cumulative from each incremental quarry, but sites are assessed one by one, which provides convenient diffusion of the threat by each applicant. There is no mechanism at present to assess cumulative threats. And we're faced with similar problems with individual tree removal applications in an area where many trees are being removed one by one. Individual application by application. This has a particularly negative effect on the environment in a recognised wildlife corridor. The application containing the plans and the EIS will be advertised and open for objections and submissions in the normal application process. It will require the responsible decision maker to address the environmental impact in the decision-making process and respond to the application either favourably or unfavourably. The goal here is to address the environmental impacts of a development or a proposal, not for the applicants to simply ignore any threats to our environment or continue to exploit loopholes in the current legislation. So under my bill proposed today, the Planning and Environment Act would be amended to ensure the decision maker only approves applications where negative environmental impacts have been identified in the new EIS process and satisfactorily addressed. This way we can segue from an arbitrary and discretionary system that tends to give more consideration to economic and social factors with a possible waft of green to one that ensures the environment is considered up front and any outstanding problems and threats are resolved in all planning applications. It's an urgent first step we need to take to revitalise the Planning and Environment Act. We're no longer in 1987. Endless population growth to promote denser and denser development should not remain our primary goal. Our goal now in 2021 must be must be to protect and preserve this wonderful state and the environment we have left in which we live, protect our natural assets, protect the health, well-being and even happiness of our residents, and protect Victoria, because development at all costs, particularly when the cost is our environment and our native species, is not the right way to shape our future. In summary, we need to put the environment back into the Planning and Environment Act, which has essentially become an act of fast-track planning with little thought put into ecological conservation and protection. There are currently more than 700 different wildlife species facing extinction in Victoria. This is an indictment on our state and something we should give cause to our leaders to back our environment and the health of our plants and animals. It isn't just about elevating the importance of our wildlife and our environment, but also for our residents, the people of Victoria. A healthy environment equates to a healthy population. I hope you can all support this bill as a crucial step to ensure a healthy environment and a healthy population in Victoria.